The condensation on the windshield caught the first gray light of dawn, turning the world outside into a watercolor blur of parking lot lights and distant highway signs. Nora Callahan opened her eyes slowly, her neck stiff from another night sleeping upright in the driver's seat, her breath visible in the cold October air. Beside her, curled into a nest of blankets in the passenger seat, 6-year-old Wren slept with her thumb hovering near her mouth, a habit she had abandoned at 4, but returned to somewhere around the 15th parking lot. The 20th stranger knocking on their window the 100th night of uncertainty. 2 years. 730 days of waking up like this. Of checking mirrors before checking the time. Of knowing exactly which Walmart parking lots had security guards who looked the other way. Which rest stops had working bathrooms, which fast food restaurants would let a woman and her daughter sit for hours nursing a single cup of coffee. 2 years of being invisible. The van smelled of stale coffee and damp upholstery of the lavender air freshener Nora hung from the rearview mirror in a desperate attempt to make this steel box feel like something other than what it was. A tomb. A holding cell. A purgatory on wheels. She reached over and brushed a strand of dark hair from Wren's forehead. The girl stirred but didn't wake. Good. Let her sleep. Let her stay in whatever dream she was having, because dreams were the only place left where they had a home. Nora's phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. She fished it out, squinting at the cracked screen. The battery was at 11% because finding places to charge had become another daily calculation. Another small survival task in an endless list of small survival tasks. One new email. She almost ignored it. Probably spam. Probably another collection agency that had somehow found her new email address. Probably another reminder of the $180,000 in medical debt that had swallowed her father's final months, and then swallowed everything else too. But she opened it anyway, and the world stopped. The email was from Ashton County, Montana. The subject line read, Homestead Hopefuls Program, Application Status. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs as she read. Dear Ms. Callahan, congratulations. Your application for the Ashton County Homestead Hopefuls Program has been selected through our random lottery system. You have been assigned Property 7B-4, located at the terminus of Ridge Road in Millbrook, Montana. The purchase price is $4 payable upon signing the transfer documents at the Ashton County Municipal Building. Please arrive within 7 days to complete the transaction. Sincerely, Vernon Suttles, County Clerk. $4. The price of a gallon of gas. The price of a value meal. The price of a large coffee and a donut. The kind of small luxury she had stopped allowing herself 18 months ago. The price of a house. She had applied for the program 3 months earlier on a night when despair had driven her to search for things that seemed impossible. Homesteading programs, land giveaways, government initiatives designed to revive dying towns by giving away properties that nobody wanted. She had filled out dozens of applications. Most never responded. A few sent polite rejections. She had stopped expecting anything because expectations were a luxury she could no longer afford. And now this. Nora read the email 3 more times. Then she read it again, looking for the catch, the fine print, the cruel joke hiding between the lines. But the words remained the same. Property 7B-4. $4. 7 days. She looked at Wren, still sleeping, still dreaming of castles or puppies or whatever beautiful things lived in the mind of a 6-year-old who didn't fully understand why they lived in a van. Montana was 7 hours away. 7 hours through mountain passes and across high plains into a part of the country Nora had never seen, toward a house she knew nothing about except that it existed and it cost $4. It was insane. It was probably a scam. It was almost certainly too good to be true. But Nora Callahan had learned something in 2 years of parking lots and cold nights and quiet tears. She had learned that when you have nothing left to lose, the only direction is forward. She started the van. They drove through the morning and into the afternoon, the landscape shifting from the gray sprawl of the city to the endless roll of Montana's high country. Mountains rose in the distance like sleeping giants, their peaks already white with early snow. The highway narrowed to 2 lanes, then to cracked asphalt, then to something that felt more like a suggestion than a road. Wren woke somewhere around noon and ate crackers from a box Nora kept wedged between the seats. "Where are we going, Mommy?" Nora gripped the steering wheel tighter. She had been rehearsing this answer for hours, trying to find words that were honest but not too heavy, hopeful, but not promising too much. "We're going to see a house, sweetheart. A house that might be ours." Wren pressed her face to the window, watching the pine trees blur past. Is it a castle? The question hit Nora somewhere deep in that place where mothers store all the guilt and worry and fierce protective love that comes with bringing a child into an uncertain world. "I don't know, baby. We'll see when we get there. I hope it's a castle. With a tower. And maybe a dragon, but a nice dragon. The kind that likes to be petted." Nora smiled despite herself. That would be something, wouldn't it? They drove on. The towns grew smaller and farther apart. Gas stations became rare enough that Nora started watching the fuel gauge with growing anxiety. The cell signal disappeared somewhere around a place called Elk Ridge, and the silence of the mountains closed in around them like a held breath. This was the edge of the map, the place where roads ended and wilderness began. And somewhere ahead, waiting in the silence, was Property 7B-4. Millbrook announced itself with a hand-painted sign so weathered that the letters were barely legible. "Welcome to Millbrook, population 387. Someone had crossed out the original number with black paint and written a new one beneath it, then crossed that out too. The current figure looked like it might be 312, but even that seemed optimistic given the emptiness of the main street. The town was a single block of brick buildings huddled together against the Montana wind. A post office, a diner with a closed sign in the window, a hardware store that looked like it hadn't updated its display since the Reagan administration, a church with a steeple that tilted slightly to the left, as if it had grown tired of reaching toward heaven. The Ashton County Municipal Building sat at the end of the street, a squat brick structure with narrow windows and a flagpole out front where the American flag hung limp in the still air. Nora parked the van and looked at Wren in the rearview mirror. "Okay, sweetheart, I need you to be very good while Mommy talks to some people. Can you do that?" Wren nodded solemnly. "I'll be good. I'm always good. I know you are, baby. I know you are." They walked up the concrete steps. Together, Wren's small hand warm in Nora's cold fingers. The door creaked when Nora pushed it open, and the sound echoed in the empty lobby like an announcement. The inside smelled of floor wax and old paper, and the particular mustiness of government buildings that have been doing the same job for generations. A clock on the wall ticked with mechanical precision each second, a small labored effort. Behind a tall counter of dark, scarred wood sat a man in his 60s with thinning gray hair and eyes that had seen every possible permutation of human hope and desperation walk through his door. His nameplate read, Vernon Suttles, County Clerk. He looked up as Nora approached, his gaze moving from her face to Wren and back again. Something flickered in his expression. Not hostility. Something closer to weariness. Or maybe pity. Ms. Callahan, I presume. Yes. I'm here about the Homestead Hopefuls program. Property 7B-4. Vernon Suttles nodded slowly and slid a thin folder across the counter. His movements were deliberate, careful, like a man handling something that might be dangerous. The old Hargrove place. You drove all the way from... He glanced at a paper in the folder. Seattle. Yes. 7 hours in that van with a child. Yes. He studied her for a long moment, and Nora forced herself to meet his gaze. She had been studied before. By social workers, by police officers, by well-meaning strangers who saw a woman living in a van with her daughter and made assumptions about drugs or mental illness or bad choices. But Vernon Suttles wasn't looking at her with judgment. He was looking at her with something that might have been concern. You need to understand what you're signing up for, he said, finally. He pulled a document from the folder and pushed it across the counter along with a pen. The $4 price tag is symbolic. The obligations are very real. Nora picked up the document. Dense paragraphs of legal text swam before her eyes. The basics are these, Vernon said, pointing with a blunt finger. You're purchasing the property as is, where is. That means any and all faults are now your problem. The county makes no warranty as to the condition of the structure, the potability of the water, or the presence of vermin rot or structural instability. Nora's stomach tightened. I understand. I'm not sure you do. His voice softened just slightly. No one has lived in that house for 5 years, not since Dorothea Hargrove passed. The place has been sitting empty. The Homestead Hopefuls program is a last-ditch effort. We had over 200 applications for this property. The computer selected you. He made it sound like the computer had made a grave error in judgment. Wren tugged at Nora's hand. Mommy, I need to use the bathroom. Vernon pointed toward a hallway. Down there on the left. Second door. After Wren disappeared down the corridor, Vernon leaned forward across the counter. His voice dropped. Look, Ms. Callahan, I'm supposed to just get your signature and your $4. That's my job. But you've got a child with you and I've got a conscience. So I'm going to be straight with you. He reached into the folder and pulled out another document. It was a tax delinquency notice, and when Nora saw the numbers, her breath caught in her throat. $52,000. The back taxes on the property, Vernon said. Dorothea let them pile up in her final years. When she died without a will, the property fell to the county, but the tax debt stayed attached to the deed. Nora's mind reeled. How can there be a tax debt if the county owns it? It's complicated. Vernon tapped the paper. A development company called Crestwood Capital has been paying the interest on that debt for 3 years. They've been circling this property like vultures over a carcass. Why would they do that? Because if the debt isn't settled, they can petition the court to buy the lien and foreclose. They want the land. They've been buying up parcels all over this valley. The Hargrove property is the last piece of a puzzle they've been putting together for years. The cold dread that had become Nora's constant companion settled deeper into her bones. This wasn't a gift. It was a trap. So what does this mean for me? Vernon's eyes held hers. It means you have a choice. You can walk away right now. No harm, no foul. I'll tear up the application, and you can drive back to Seattle and forget you ever heard of Millbrook, Montana. Or you can sign, and if you sign, you have 90 days. He held up 3 fingers. 90 days to either pay the full amount of the back taxes, which I'm guessing you can't do, or get the homestead declared habitable by a county inspector. If the property meets basic habitability standards running water-safe electrical sound, roof, the county can award you a revitalization grant that will automatically clear the tax lien. 90 days, habitable, Crestwood Capital. The words circled in Nora's mind like crows. Most people in your position would walk away, Vernon said quietly. I'm telling you this because I'd rather you make an informed decision than sign something you don't understand and end up worse off than when you started. Wren emerged from the bathroom and trotted back to Nora's side, slipping her hand back into her mother's grip. Nora looked down at her daughter, at the tired eyes that still held wonder, at the small fingers that trusted her completely, at the child who deserved a home, but had never had one, not since the apartment they had lost when the medical bills came due. She thought about the van, about 2 more years of parking lots and cold mornings and the slow erosion of her daughter's childhood. She thought about running. She was good at running. 2 years of practice had made her an expert. But she was tired of running. Where do I sign? Vernon held her gaze for a long moment. Then he pushed the pen closer. Right there at the bottom, and I'll need your $4. Nora signed her name. Her hand didn't shake. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out 4 crumpled $1 bills, almost the last of her cash, and laid them on the counter. Vernon took the money and stamped the document with a heavy final thud. The sound echoed in the empty building like a gavel falling. Here are the keys. He dropped a pair of old rusted keys onto the counter. Property's 3 miles north of town on Ridge Road. You can't miss it. It's the last house before the woods. He watched her pick up the keys, his face unreadable. Good luck, Miss Callahan. Something tells me you're going to need it. The road out of Millbrook was a journey backward through time. Pavement gave way to gravel, and the sound of stones crunching beneath the van's tires became a rough, unsettling rhythm. The tidy houses of town thinned out and disappeared, replaced by weathered barns leaning into the wind and fields that stretched toward a horizon stitched with dark, brooding forest. The sky had grown heavy, the color of an old bruise, and a cold wind began to whip stray leaves across the road in frantic patterns. Wren pressed her nose against the window. Are we there yet? Almost, baby. With every mile, the weight of Vernon's words grew heavier. 90 days, habitable, Crestwood capital. The words beat against Nora's skull like a pulse. What had she done? She had signed away 7 hours of driving and $4 irreplaceable for a house she had never seen in a town that seemed to be dying with a corporation already circling to take it away. The van, for all its misery, was at least mobile. They could always run. This property, this collapsing house, was an anchor. It would either save them or drown them. "Look," Wren shouted. A deer and a lone doe stood at the edge of the tree line, her head raised, watching them with large, liquid eyes. For a moment she held perfectly still, a statue carved from the wilderness itself. Then she flicked her white tail and vanished into the shadows of the pines. The road narrowed again, becoming little more than 2 dirt tracks with stubborn grass growing between them. Overhanging branches scraped against the roof of the van, a sound like fingernails dragging across metal. They were utterly, completely alone. And then Nora saw it. The house stood at the end of the road where the path dissolved into a tangle of overgrown woods. It was less a building than a memory of one, a shape that seemed to waver between existence and collapse. The roof sagged in the middle like a broken spine. The porch tilted at a drunken angle, one corner having given up entirely, and collapsed into a pile of splintered wood and rotting boards. Most of the windows were boarded over with gray, weathered planks. The few that weren't gaped open like empty eye sockets, dark and hollow. A massive oak tree stood beside the house, its bare branches reaching over the roof like the skeletal fingers of some ancient hand. The paint, what remained of it, was peeling away in long strips, revealing the dark, aged wood beneath. It was exactly as Nora had feared, only worse, so much worse. She pulled the van to a stop where the driveway had once been, now just a sea of weeds and mud. She killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the whisper of wind through the pines and the frantic beating of her own heart. This was it. Property 7B-4, the $4 farmstead, her castle. Wren was quiet beside her. Nora turned to look at her daughter and saw the wonder draining from those small eyes, replaced by something that looked terrifyingly like disappointment. "It's broken, Mommy." The words were a whisper, small and trembling, and they hit Nora harder than any blow she had ever received. What had she done? She had dragged her child 7 hours across Montana for this. She had promised her a home and delivered her to a ruin. She had let hope blind her to reality, and now they both had to face the truth. "It's not broken, sweetheart." The words felt like glass in her throat. "It's just sleeping. It's an old house. It needs us to wake it up." Wren looked from the house to her mother and back again. Her lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. She was trying so hard to believe. Nora had to believe too. For both of them. "Come on, let's go meet our house." Stepping onto the porch was an act of faith. Each footstep was met with a groan of protest from the rotting wood, and Nora held Wren's hand tightly, guiding her around the collapsed section, where boards had given way to reveal the dark earth beneath. The front door was magnificent, or had been once. Thick oak with a small circular window of stained glass at the top. deep blue and fiery red that had somehow survived years of neglect. The colors caught the fading afternoon light like jewels. The key slid into the lock with a rusty shriek. It took both of Nora's hands and all her weight to turn the mechanism. The lock resisted, then gave way with a loud, definitive clunk that echoed in the silence. She pushed the door open. It swung inward on groaning hinges, revealing darkness. A wave of air rolled out to meet them, thick and stale, carrying the scent of years of abandonment, dust, mouse droppings, mildew, and something else beneath it all. Something fainter, dried herbs, old paper, the ghost of lavender. "It's stinky," Wren whispered. "It is. We'll open some windows." Nora stepped inside first, her eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. Faint light filtered through the dirty stained glass, and the cracks around the boarded windows illuminating a world preserved under a thick layer of gray dust. It was like stepping into a photograph from another century. Dust covered everything, but everything was still here. A long sofa with embroidered cushions still holding its shape beneath the gray shroud. A stone fireplace black with old soot. A stack of petrified logs, resting in the grate waiting for a match that would never come. A grand staircase with a carved wooden banister, disappearing into the shadows of the second floor. The house was full of furniture, full of objects, full of the remnants of a life. It was as if the owner had simply walked out one day and never returned. Nora moved deeper into the room, her boots leaving clean prints on the dusty floor. The cold inside was worse than the cold outside, a deep, penetrating chill that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. She ran her hand along the back of the sofa. The dust was soft as velvet. Beneath it, the fabric was faded but of high quality. This had not been a poor house. It had been a beautiful house once, a loved house. "Mommy, look." Wren had wandered toward the fireplace, and Nora's heart jumped as she turned to look. On the mantelpiece, 3 objects stood out against the dust. A small porcelain bird, white with delicate blue markings. A polished river stone, smooth and gray. A brass candlestick, empty of any candle. They were clean, immaculate. Not a speck of dust on any of them. Everything else in the house was buried under 5 years of neglect. But these 3 objects gleamed as if someone had polished them that very morning. A chill snaked up Nora's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "Don't touch anything, okay, sweetheart?" She needed to assess the damage. Methodically, carefully. She walked through the downstairs, cataloging each room. The kitchen was a disaster. The ceiling above the sink had caved in, leaving a gaping hole open to the sky. Rain and leaves had poured through, forming a sludgy, rotting pile on the floor. The appliances were rusted hulks from another decade. This was where the smell of decay was strongest. But the rest of the downstairs, the living room, a small study lined with books, was remarkably intact beneath its layer of dust. The structure felt solid despite the cosmetic decay. The bones of the house were still strong. As Nora walked back into the main living area, her foot caught on something. She looked down. One of the wide plank floorboards near the hearth was slightly raised, its edge sticking up by less than half an inch. She nudged it with the toe of her boot. It wobbled. Her heart gave a small skip. She knelt down, her knees cracking in the cold silence. She dug her fingernails into the crack and pulled. The board resisted, stuck by years of humidity and neglect, and then it lifted with a screech of old nails. Beneath it was a dark, square cavity, and nestled inside that cavity was a small metal box. It was old black, about the size of a book. The lid was secured with a simple clasp that showed no sign of rust. Someone had oiled it. Someone had cared for it. Nora looked over at Wren, who was humming to herself by the mantelpiece, tracing patterns in the dust with her finger. Then Nora reached into the darkness and lifted the box out. It was heavier than it looked, cold metal against her palms. Her hands trembled as she worked the clasp. It sprang open with a small metallic sigh. Inside, lined with faded red velvet, were two things: a roll of cash held together by a brittle rubber band, and a letter. The money was $500 in $20 bills. Nora counted it twice, her fingers fumbling. It was a fortune and nothing at the same time. Enough for groceries for a month. Enough to fix a flat tire. Enough to buy a small window of breathing room. Nowhere near enough to pay a $52,000 tax debt. But the letter. The letter changed everything. It was a single sheet of thick, cream-colored paper, folded in half, and on the front, in an elegant, spidery script, were words that stopped Nora's heart. To the one who comes after. She unfolded the paper with shaking hands. The ink was a faded brown, the handwriting old-fashioned and careful. A date at the top, 5 years ago, almost to the day. If you are reading this, then the county has finally done what I could not bring myself to do. They have passed my home into new hands. They probably told you my name was Dorothea Hargrove. They may have told you I was a recluse, that I was eccentric, that I died alone. All of this is true. They will not have told you that I have been waiting for you. My family has lived on this land for 4 generations. I was born in this house. I will die in this house. And now the house needs a new guardian. The money you have found is a welcome gift. Use it for what you need most right now. Food. Warm clothes for your child if you have one. It is not a solution. It is a beginning. This house is a puzzle, and it is a vault. I could not trust the banks. I could not trust the law. So I made my own arrangements. There is more. Enough to save this place. Enough to give you a real start. But you must earn it. You must prove you are the right person to protect this land. Crestwood Capital will be a shadow at your back. They are vultures in expensive suits. They want the water, the spring that feeds this valley. They tried to take it from me for 20 years, and they will try to take it from you. Do not let them. This house has secrets in its bones. It will help you if you listen. Your first task is this: where the heart of the house once burned brightest, but now holds only emptiness, look for a story left behind. The house remembers everything. Good luck. Dorothea Hargrove. Nora read the letter 3 times. A puzzle. A vault. Vultures in expensive suits. How had Dorothea known? How had she known there would be a child? How had she known exactly what Nora would need to hear? The letter was 5 years old. Dorothea had been dead for 5 years. And yet the words on this page spoke directly to Nora's circumstances, as if the old woman had somehow seen across time and recognized her. It was impossible. But so was a house that cost $4. Nora looked at the mantelpiece, at the 3 clean objects gleaming in the dusty room. She looked at the cold fireplace, the empty hearth, where the heart of the house once burned brightest. The fireplace, but now holds only emptiness. She looked at the bookshelf standing beside the hearth, its shelves crammed with dust-covered volumes. Look for a story left behind. A story. A book. Nora stood and crossed the room, her footsteps silent in the thick dust. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books. Old leather-bound volumes. Shakespeare, Dickens, Tolstoy. Books that had been read and loved and then abandoned to the slow patience of time. And then her fingers brushed against one that was different, thin, bound in simple blue cloth instead of leather. No title on the spine. She pulled it out. A journal. Handmade, the pages sewn together with careful stitches. She opened it. The first page was a child's drawing of this very house, with a smiling sun in the corner and stick figures standing on the porch. And beneath the drawing, in the same spidery script as the letter, a single sentence: the house remembers. Nora clutched the journal to her chest. Outside, the wind picked up, and the old house creaked and groaned around her, like something stirring from a long sleep. She looked at Wren, who had found a patch of dusty sunlight on the floor and was drawing pictures in the dust with her finger. For the first time since the van, since the parking lots, since the slow collapse of everything she had once known, Nora felt something stir in her chest. Not hope. Not yet. But the possibility of hope. And sometimes that was enough. That night the cold was a living thing. It crept through the metal walls of the van, wrapped its fingers around Nora's ankles, breathed frost against the windows until the glass was thick with ice. Outside, the farmhouse loomed against a sky blazing with stars, more stars than Nora had ever seen, a river of light pouring across the darkness. She had decided against sleeping in the house. The caved-in kitchen ceiling, the boarded windows, the deep cold that seemed to radiate from the walls. It felt more dangerous than the van. At least the van was a known quantity. At least the van had always kept them alive. Wren slept in the back seat, buried under every blanket they owned. Her breathing was soft and even, the untroubled sleep of a child who believed in castles and nice dragons and the fundamental goodness of the world. Nora lay in the driver's seat, eyes open, staring at the dark shape of the house through the frosted windshield. The $500 was tucked inside her bra, a small crinkling weight against her skin. The journal was in her jacket pocket, pressing against her ribs. 90 days. $52,000. A house that was more whole than home. A corporation circling like wolves. The reality of what she had done pressed in from all sides. She had been a fool. A desperate, romantic fool who had signed papers and driven 7 hours and believed that the universe might finally be offering her a break. But the universe didn't offer breaks. The universe offered parking lots and collection agencies and the slow, grinding poverty that had swallowed her father's final months and then swallowed everything else, too. Tears pricked at the corners of Nora's eyes. She let them fall silently the way she had learned to cry over 2 years of nights like this. A mother's tears had to be quiet. A mother couldn't wake her child with the sound of her own breaking. She cried for the house that was a ruin. She cried for the hope that had turned to ash. She cried for her daughter who deserved so much more than a mother, who made desperate decisions and called them courage. And then, through the frozen window, she saw something. A light. Inside the house. Nora stopped breathing. She sat up slowly, wiping her eyes, staring through the ice-crusted glass. There, in one of the downstairs windows, a soft glow, pale and flickering like a candle or a flashlight moving through the rooms. Someone was inside. Her heart hammered. Her hand found the door handle. She should stay in the van. She should lock the doors and wait for morning. She should not go into that dark house toward an unknown light in the dead of night. But the house was hers now. Whatever was inside, whatever was happening, it was her responsibility. She looked at Wren, still sleeping, still safe. Then she grabbed the flashlight from the emergency kit and slipped out of the van. The cold hit her like a wall. Her breath plumed white in the moonlight as she crossed the frozen mud toward the porch. The steps groaned under her weight, and she moved carefully, testing each board before committing her full weight. The front door was still locked. She was certain she had locked it, but as she approached, she saw that it stood slightly ajar, a thin line of darkness visible between the door and the frame. She pushed it open. The hinges screamed in the silence. "Hello." Her voice echoed in the empty rooms. No answer. She stepped inside, sweeping her flashlight across the dusty furniture. The beam caught motes of dust hanging in the still air. The room was exactly as she had left it. Sofa, fireplace, bookshelf, stairs. No light. No movement. No one. But as her flashlight swept across the kitchen doorway, she saw something that made her freeze. On the kitchen table, the same table buried under inches of dust, there was a clear patch. Letters traced in the dust by a human finger. One word. Stay. Nora's blood turned to ice. She spun flashlight, sweeping the corners of the room, the stairs, the shadows. Nothing. No one. But someone had been here. Someone had written that message. And whoever they were, they wanted her to stay. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in the van with the doors locked and the flashlight in her hand, watching the house until dawn broke over the mountains and painted the world in shades of gold and amber. In the daylight, the terror of the night receded slightly. The word in the dust could have been anyone, a vagrant passing through, local teenagers playing pranks, someone from town who knew the house was occupied again and wanted to welcome her in the strangest possible way. But deep down, Nora knew none of those explanations felt right. The house remembered. That's what Dorothea's letter had said. The house remembered everything. Maybe it remembered her too. Wren woke with the sunrise stretching and yawning in her nest of blankets. "Mommy, is it morning?" "Yes, baby, it's morning." Can we go inside the castle today? Nora looked at the house, at the sagging roof and the boarded windows and the porch that looked ready to collapse, at the mystery of the dust message and the clean objects on the mantelpiece and the journal full of secrets. 90 days. That's what Vernon Suttles had said. 90 days to make this ruin habitable or lose it forever. She had two choices. Run like she always ran. Take the $500 and drive until Montana was a memory. Find another parking lot, another temporary solution, another way to survive without ever truly living. Or stay. Fight. Try to solve Dorothea Hargrove's puzzle and uncover whatever secrets she had hidden in these walls. Wren's small face appeared in the rearview mirror, eyes full of hope. It's not broken, right, Mommy? You said it's just sleeping. And in that moment, Nora made her choice. The Callahan family didn't run. Her father had taught her that in the months before the cancer took him. We don't run, Nora. We stand our ground. She had been running for 2 years. Maybe it was time to stop. That's right, sweetheart. She reached back and squeezed Wren's hand. It's just sleeping. And today we're going to start waking it up. The morning light transformed the farmhouse from a haunted silhouette into something almost hopeful. Sunbeams slanted through the cracks in the boarded windows, cutting golden paths through the dust-thick air. The house was still a ruin, but in the daylight, Nora could see past the decay to the bones beneath solid oak beams, hand-cut stone, the craftsmanship of people who built things to last. She sat on the porch steps with the journal in her lap, a cup of instant coffee warming her hands. Wren was inside exploring the living room with the cautious wonder of a child in a museum, touching everything gently, asking questions about each dusty object. The journal was a window into another time. Dorothea Hargrove had been 6 years old when she made her first entry, a crayon drawing of the house with her family standing in front. Her mother, her father, an older brother named Thomas. The stick figures were smiling and the sun in the corner had a face. As Nora turned the pages, Dorothea grew up before her eyes. The crayon gave way to pencil, then ink. The drawings became more sophisticated, the observations more detailed. She wrote about the birds that nested in the eaves, the way the creek sounded different in spring than in autumn, the names she gave to the trees in the yard. And woven throughout the pages like threads in a tapestry were clues. Nora found the passage she was looking for on page 47. My favorite hiding place was the kitchen pantry. It was dark and smelled of cinnamon and cloves, and Thomas could never find me there. At the back of the bottom shelf there was a loose panel, a perfect little cavern for a small girl to hide her treasures. I kept my secret box there, full of pretty stones and bird feathers, and the silver button I found by the creek. The pantry. The loose panel. Another piece of the puzzle. Nora closed the journal and looked toward the house. The kitchen was damaged. The collapsed ceiling made it dangerous. But the pantry might still be intact. If Dorothea had hidden something there as a child, and if she had continued using that hiding place into adulthood, there could be more money, more answers, more pieces of whatever game the old woman had set in motion. Nora stood brushing dust from her jeans. Wren, stay in the living room. Okay, don't go upstairs. Okay, Mommy. She made her way through the house to the kitchen doorway and stopped. The damage was worse in the morning light. Half the ceiling had come down, bringing insulation and rotted wood and years of accumulated debris. Rain had poured through the hole, turning the floor into a swamp of mold and decay. The smell was thick enough to taste. But there on the far wall was the pantry door. It was still standing, still closed. The collapse had missed it by inches. Nora picked her way carefully across the ruined kitchen, testing each step before committing her weight. The floor squelched under her boots. Something small scurried away in the shadows, a mouse she hoped, and nothing larger. She reached the pantry door and pulled it open. Inside was a small space lined with wooden shelves, empty now except for dust and cobwebs, and the desiccated corpse of a long-dead spider. The air smelled different here. Less rot, more age. Cinnamon and cloves, just like Dorothea had written the ghost of spices that had been stored here decades ago. Nora knelt down, her knees pressing into the dusty floor. She ran her hands along the back wall of the bottom shelf, feeling for irregularities, for seams, for anything that didn't belong. There, at the very back, a rectangular outline barely visible in the wood. She pushed against it. Nothing happened. She tried to pry at the edges with her fingernails, but the panel was sealed tight. Either time had welded it shut, or it was locked somehow. Then she remembered. The three objects on the mantelpiece. The bird. The stone. The candlestick. The candlestick had a pointed spike at the top, designed to hold a candle in place. But it could serve another purpose, too. Nora scrambled back through the kitchen, faster now, less careful. She grabbed the brass candlestick from the mantelpiece, feeling its weight in her hand, studying the pointed tip. Then she returned to the pantry and knelt again. There in the corner of the hidden panel was a tiny hole, no bigger than the tip of a nail, almost invisible in the shadows. She inserted the spike of the candlestick into the hole and pushed. Click. The panel swung inward, revealing a dark cavity behind the wall. Nora's flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating a space larger than she had expected. Not a small hiding spot for childhood treasures, but proper compartment intentionally built, carefully maintained. Inside was a package wrapped in oilcloth, heavy and rectangular. She pulled it out, her heart racing, and carried it back to the living room where the light was better. Wren watched with wide eyes as Nora knelt on the floor and carefully unwrapped the oilcloth. Money. Stacks and stacks of $100 bills bound with paper bands from a bank that probably no longer existed. And beneath the money, another letter and a bundle of documents tied with faded red ribbon. Nora counted the cash with shaking hands. $75,000. $75,000 hidden in a wall, combined with the $500 from the first hiding spot. That was more than enough to pay the $52,000 tax debt and have money left over. More than enough to fix the house. More than enough to change everything. But Dorothea's first letter had warned her not to be hasty. A paid debt does not stop a determined predator. Nora reached for the new letter. My dear guardian, you found it. I knew you would. This house chooses its own. The money is yours, a more significant sum than before. It may be enough to pay the vultures their pound of flesh. But before you rush to the county clerk with a cashier's check, I urge you to read the documents I have included. Crestwood Capital does not want this land for houses or farms. They want something far more valuable. They want the water. The spring that feeds the creek behind this house has been tested by geologists. The water is unusually pure, rich in minerals that are increasingly rare. It is the kind of water that wealthy people pay a fortune to drink, bottled and shipped from pristine mountain sources. Crestwood wants to build a bottling plant and a luxury spa. They want to own the water to sell it back to the world at 1,000% markup, and to leave this valley high and dry. They came to me 20 years ago with an offer. I refused. They came back with bigger offers. I refused again. Then they came with threats disguised as legal notices. They tried to claim eminent domain. They tried to declare my property a blight. They tried to buy the county inspector. They tried everything. I fought them for 2 decades. I spent my savings on lawyers. I learned their language of paperwork and loopholes. I beat them again and again. And they were patient. They knew I was old and alone. They were waiting for me to die. This money is what I saved. It is my family's legacy liquidated and hidden because I could not trust the banks. Crestwood has eyes everywhere. Use it wisely. Protect this land. Do not let them win. There is one more secret, the most important one. The heart of the house is the hearth, but the soul is what protects it. Find the soul's keeper, and you will find the final key. Yours in the fight. Dorothea. Nora spread the documents across the floor. Survey maps, geological reports, water purity tests with numbers and chemical symbols she didn't fully understand. Letters from lawyers. Letters from Crestwood Capital, escalating from friendly offers to thinly veiled threats. The spring, the water. That's what this was all about. Not the house, not the land, the water beneath it. She looked at the money spread before her. $75,000, enough to pay the taxes and disappear, enough to buy a few more years of survival, or enough to start a war. Day 5 began with the sound of tires on gravel. Nora was on the roof carefully testing each shingle before putting weight on it, assessing the damage to the structure. From up there, she could see the curve of Ridge Road as it wound through the trees, and she watched the black SUV approach like a shark, cutting through dark water. It stopped in front of the house. The engine died. A man stepped out. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a suit that cost more than everything Nora owned. His hair was slicked back. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone who had never been told no. "Ms. Callahan." Nora climbed down from the roof, taking her time making him wait. "Who's asking?" "Boyd Tatum. I represent Crestwood Capital." He smiled, showing too many teeth. "I wanted to stop by and introduce myself. Welcome you to the neighborhood, so to speak." "That's thoughtful. We like to be good neighbors." His eyes swept over the house, the sagging porch, the boarded windows. "Quite a project you've taken on. The old Hargrove place. Been empty for years." "I know. It's a lot of work for one person. A lot of expense." He pulled a card from his pocket and held it out. "I'd like to make you an offer. $80,000 cash for the property. As is, where is. You could walk away today with more money than most people save in a decade. Nora didn't take the card. Not interested. Boyd Tatum's smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker of annoyance quickly suppressed. That's a generous offer, Ms. Callahan. More than generous given the condition of the property. Most people would jump at it. I'm not most people. No. He tucked the card back into his pocket. I can see that. He looked past her toward the house, and his expression hardened almost imperceptibly. You have a daughter, I understand. Lovely little girl. I saw her playing in the yard when I drove up. Something cold settled in Nora's stomach. What about her? Nothing. Just an observation. He spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. It's just that this is a remote area, Miss Callahan. No neighbors for miles. No police presence to speak of. Things can happen out here. Accidents. Fires. He let the words hang in the air. It would be a shame if something happened to that lovely little girl, because her mother was too stubborn to take a good deal. Nora's hands curled into fists at her sides. The fear was there, hot and sharp in her chest, but underneath it was something else, something that felt like steel. Is that a threat? A warning from a concerned neighbor? He smiled again, but there was no warmth in it now. Think about my offer. I'll be in touch. He turned and walked back to his SUV, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel. The engine roared to life, and he was gone, leaving nothing but dust settling in the afternoon light. Nora stood frozen, watching the empty road. Then she ran to find Wren. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat in the van with the doors locked, watching the house, watching the road, watching for headlights that might come crawling through the darkness. Boyd Tatum's words played on repeat in her mind. Things can happen out here. Accidents. Fires. She thought about the $75,000 hidden in the house. Enough to take Wren and run. Enough to disappear into some other state, some other life where Crestwood Capital couldn't find them. But where would they go? Back to parking lots and cold nights. Back to the slow erosion of hope that had defined the past 2 years. And even if they ran, would Crestwood stop? Or would they find her eventually? The way they seemed to find everyone who stood in their way. Around midnight, Nora got out of the van. She walked around to the back, where the van's undercarriage was exposed to the cold night air. She lay down on the frozen ground and pointed her flashlight upward, examining the mechanical components she barely understood. And there it was. The brake line. Sliced cleanly, professionally, in a place where it would leak slowly. Not enough to be noticed immediately, but enough to fail when she needed it most. Someone had been here. Someone had crawled under her van and cut the line that kept her and her daughter safe. They weren't bluffing. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a war. For 3 days, Nora barely slept. She paid a mechanic in town to fix the brake line, a gruff, silent man named Earl, who asked no questions and charged her fairly. She kept Wren close, never letting her out of sight. She jumped at every sound, every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind through the pines. On the 7th night, she made her decision. She was sitting in the dark living room, the journal open in her lap, reading by flashlight. Wren was asleep upstairs. Nora had finally cleared enough debris from one of the bedrooms to make it safe, and the house was silent, except for the settling of old wood and the distant hooting of an owl. The journal was full of Dorothea's memories, her childhood, her family, her love for this land and this house. But woven through the personal history were practical observations too. Notes on which floorboards creaked, diagrams of the property boundaries, references to hiding places Nora hadn't found yet, and on the final page, one last entry. I am dying. I know it now. The doctor gives me weeks, but I have done everything I can. I have hidden what needs to be hidden. I have left what needs to be found. The rest is up to whoever comes after. The Callahan family doesn't run. Nora stopped breathing. She read the line again and again. The Callahan family doesn't run. Her name. Her family's motto. The words her father had spoken to her 1,000 times. It was impossible. Dorothea had died 5 years ago. She couldn't have known who would buy this house. She couldn't have known about Nora, about her family, about the words that had sustained her through the darkest nights. And yet, there they were, written in faded brown ink in a journal that had been closed for half a decade. Nora set the journal down with trembling hands. The house chooses its own. That's what Dorothea had written. The house remembers everything. Maybe it did. Maybe it had reached across time and space and found the one person who would understand. The one person who would stay. Or maybe it was just coincidence, a phrase common enough that any family might use it. But sitting in that dark room surrounded by the ghosts of another woman's life, Nora chose to believe. She chose to stop running. She chose to fight. Day 8. Nora began to work. She started with the basics. The kitchen was beyond repair, without professional help, but she could board up the hole in the ceiling to keep out the rain. She could sweep the floors, clear the debris, begin the slow process of reclaiming the house from entropy. She found tools in an old shed behind the house, rusted but functional. A hammer, a saw, a box of nails that had fused together with age but could be pried apart with patience. She learned from videos on her phone driving into town to use the diner's Wi-Fi since there was no signal at the house. How to patch a roof, how to check electrical wiring for safety, how to test water for contamination. The work was hard, harder than anything she had done in her life. Her hands blistered, her muscles screamed. At night she collapsed into exhausted sleep, too tired for nightmares. But the house responded. Each small repair was a victory. Each cleared room was territory reclaimed. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the farmhouse began to feel less like a ruin and more like a home. Wren helped in her own way. She swept floors with a broom almost as tall as she was. She organized nails into neat piles. She named the spiders they found in corners and made Nora promise not to kill them. They're guarding the castle, she explained solemnly. They eat the bad bugs. Is that so? Charlotte told me, in the book, spiders are heroes. Nora smiled despite her exhaustion. Then we'll let them stay. Day 25. The journal's final clue had been haunting Nora for weeks. The heart of the house is the hearth, but the soul is what protects it. Find the soul's keeper and you will find the final key. She had searched everywhere she could think of. She had examined every floorboard, tapped every wall, looked behind every piece of furniture. But the soul's keeper, whatever it was, remained hidden. Tonight she was sitting by the fireplace staring into the empty hearth. The stones were massive, irregular, fitted together like a puzzle by hands that had been dead for a century or more. Her eyes moved slowly across the stonework. Granite, quartz, river rock, each one unique, each one chosen and placed with care. And then she saw it. One stone about chest height on the left side of the chimney was different from the others. It had a vein of white quartz running through it, not random but shaped like a key. Nora stood and moved closer, running her fingers along the surface of the stone. It was the same temperature as the others, the same texture. But when she pressed her fingertips along the edges, she felt a small indentation on the underside, a finger hold. Her heart hammered as she hooked her fingers into the groove and pulled. For a moment, nothing happened. The stone was solid, immovable part of the wall for 100 years. Then, with a low, grinding sound, it pivoted. It didn't come out. It swung inward, revealing a dark cavity inside the chimney itself. Nora grabbed her flashlight and pointed it into the darkness. Inside was a safe. It was old, heavy, painted black. A dial lock on the front showed numbers worn smooth by time. This was the vault Dorothea had promised. The final secret. But there was something else. Resting on top of the safe was a cassette recorder. The kind Nora hadn't seen since childhood, a relic of another technological age. And next to the recorder, a single cassette tape. A piece of masking tape on the front with 2 words written in faded ink. Play me. The recorder was surprisingly functional. The batteries Nora found in the kitchen drawer still held a charge, and when she pressed play, the tape began to turn with a soft mechanical whir. Static. The sound of a room. A faint cough. Then a voice. It was a woman's voice, old, frail, barely more than a whisper. The voice of someone at the very end of their strength, speaking words they had waited a lifetime to say. If you are listening to this, then you have found my last secret and my last hope. Dorothea Hargrove. I am dying. The doctor says weeks, maybe days. My body has failed me, but my will has not. The voice paused, and Nora heard the labored sound of breathing. The safe. The combination is my birth year, 1935. Spin the dial right to 19, then left past 19 to 35. It will open. Nora reached for the dial but stopped herself. There was more. Inside that safe is everything. There is money, a great deal of money. More than enough to fix this house. More than enough to pay off Crestwood's parasites and live in peace. It is yours. A gift with no strings attached. You earned it by staying when you could have run. A long pause, the sound of the tape hissing. But there is something else in that safe. There is a ledger. My father's ledger. He documented every land purchase, every water right, every handshake deal that built this valley. And there are my own records. Taped conversations with Crestwood executives. Internal memos their lawyers accidentally sent me. Proof of bribery. Proof of intimidation. Proof of their illegal attempts to manipulate the county government. It is a meticulous record of corruption. The voice grew stronger, harder. It is a bomb. The word hung in the air. So now you have a choice I cannot make for you. You can take the money and build a quiet life. No one would blame you. You have fought for your survival. You deserve peace. Another pause. Or you can take that evidence and finish the war I started. You can use the money for lawyers, for a fight. It will be public. It will be ugly. They will come after you. They will try to discredit you, to bury you. You will not be safe. Nora heard Dorothea take a shaky breath. But you might just save this valley. You might just protect the water that feeds this land and this town. You might just beat them. The tape hissed for a long moment. I do not know which choice is right. I only know that I had to give you the choice. The money is your freedom. The evidence is your burden. And then words that stopped Nora's heart. What is a home after all? Is it a fortress to hide in? Or is it a territory worth defending? A long, shuddering breath. I did not choose you. The lottery was random. But if you are hearing this, you have already chosen yourself. You stayed. You found the secrets. You listened to an old woman's voice from beyond the grave. Pause. That tells me everything I need to know. The Callahan family doesn't run. The recording ended with a click. Nora sat in the darkness for a long time after the tape stopped. The Callahan family doesn't run. Dorothea had known. Somehow, impossibly, she had known. Or maybe she hadn't. Maybe she had recorded that phrase for someone else entirely. And it was pure coincidence that it matched the words Nora's father had repeated like a prayer. But it didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like fate. Nora stood and walked to the safe. Her hands were steady now, the trembling gone. She spun the dial. Right to 19. Left past 19 to 35. Click. The door swung open. Inside, stacks of cash. More than she had ever seen. More than she could count. Neat bundles of $100 bills packed tight, filling the safe to the brim. $180,000. She would count it later, but she knew. Beneath the money, a thick leather ledger. Manila envelopes stuffed with documents. Small cassette tapes labeled with dates and names. And something else. A Remington shotgun, old but well-maintained, wrapped in oiled cloth. Dorothea's final gift. Money evidence and the means to protect herself. Nora lifted out the ledger and opened it. Page after page of meticulous records. Names, dates, dollar amounts, connections between county officials and Crestwood executives. Proof of a conspiracy that had been operating in plain sight for decades. This was the bomb. And now Nora had to decide whether to light the fuse. She stayed up all night reading. The documents painted a picture of systematic corruption. Crestwood Capital had been buying up land in the valley for 20 years using a combination of generous offers and ruthless intimidation. When people refused to sell, accidents happened. Barns burned. Equipment broke. Loans were called in early by banks where Crestwood held influence. They had tried everything with Dorothea. When she refused to sell, they had reported building code violations that didn't exist. They had contaminated her well water and then offered to buy the damaged property at a discount. They had hired private investigators to dig up dirt on her family, her friends. And through it all, Dorothea had documented, recorded, collected, building a case that no one ever saw, because she knew she couldn't win alone. But maybe Nora could. She closed the ledger as dawn broke over the mountains. The money could pay off the taxes. The money could fix the house. The money could buy a quiet life, safe from Crestwood's reach. Or the evidence could bring them down. The evidence could protect not just her land, but the entire valley. The evidence could finish what Dorothea started. Both paths were clear. Nora looked at the safe, at the cash, at the shotgun. Then she looked at the stairs where Wren would soon be waking up. She thought about her daughter growing up here, learning to fish in the creek, playing in the meadows, watching the stars from a porch that didn't sway with the movement of a van. She thought about what it would mean to give Wren a home, a real home. Not just a place to sleep, but a territory. Something to protect. Something to fight for. What is a home, Dorothea had asked? A fortress to hide in, or a territory worth defending? Nora knew the answer now. She had always known. The Callahan family doesn't run. She made copies of everything. Over the next few days, she drove into town 3 times using the library's ancient photocopier to duplicate every document, every page of the ledger, every photograph. She made 3 complete sets of copies and stored them in 3 different locations. A safe deposit box at a bank in Billings, an envelope mailed to herself at the post office in town, and a package sent to a storage facility in Helena. If something happened to her, the evidence would survive. Then she went to work. Not on lawyers, not on lawsuits, not yet. First, she went to the neighbors. The valley was sparsely populated, but there were other families scattered along the roads. Ranchers, farmers, people who had been here for generations, watching Crestwood buy up land around them, waiting for the knock on their door. Nora found them one by one. She drove up dirt roads to weathered farmhouses. She knocked on doors and introduced herself. She showed them the documents, the proof of what Crestwood had done to Dorothea and others. Some doors closed in her face. People were scared. They had seen what happened to those who fought back. But some doors stayed open. An old rancher named Henry Kowalczyk, whose brother had sold under pressure 10 years ago and regretted it ever since. A widow named Patricia Oakes, whose husband had died in a tractor accident a month after refusing Crestwood's offer. A young couple, the Brennans, who had moved here to escape the city and found themselves trapped in a nightmare. 4 families who agreed to stand together. It wasn't an army, but it was a start. Day 40. The work on the house continued. Nora had hired Earl the mechanic to help with the roof. He wasn't a roofer by trade, but he knew construction, and he was willing to work for a fair price without asking questions. Together they stripped the damaged sections and laid new shingles. The work was slow and dangerous, but each completed section was a small victory. Inside, Nora tackled the electrical system. The old wiring was a fire hazard knob and tube from the 1940s, brittle and dangerous. She couldn't afford to rewire the whole house, but she could isolate the most dangerous sections, install new outlets where they were needed most, bring the critical systems up to code. The water was easier. The spring that fed the house was pure. Dorothea's geological surveys had confirmed that, but the pipes that carried it were corroded and leaking. Nora replaced what she could, patched what she couldn't, and tested the water obsessively until she was certain it was safe. Day by day, room by room, the house came back to life. Wren watched it happen with wonder. "The castle is waking up, Mommy." "Yes, baby, it is. It's happy now. I can tell." Nora smiled despite her exhaustion. "How can you tell? It doesn't creak as much. Before it was groaning. Now it's just breathing." Nora looked around at the clean floors, the patched walls, the windows she had freed from their boards to let in the light. Maybe Wren was right. Maybe the house was breathing again. Day 75. The black Escalade appeared without warning. Nora was on the porch painting the railings she had rebuilt the week before. Her hands were covered in white paint, her hair tied back, her face streaked with sweat. She looked up at the sound of the engine and felt her stomach drop. This wasn't Boyd Tatum's SUV. This was something bigger, blacker, more expensive. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was older than Tatum, late 50s, perhaps 60. His hair was silver, swept back from a face that had been handsome once and was now merely distinguished. His suit was dark blue, perfectly tailored, and on his wrist was a watch that probably cost more than Nora's van. Franklin Mercer. She knew him from the documents. The CEO of Crestwood Capital. The man at the top of the pyramid. He walked toward the porch with the measured stride of someone who owned everything he saw. "Miss Callahan." Nora set down her paintbrush and stood. "Mr. Mercer." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You know who I am." "I know a lot of things." He smiled, a practiced, professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I can see that. May I come up?" "You can stay where you are." He stopped at the base of the porch steps, looking up at her. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps. Or respect. He wasn't used to being told no. "I wanted to meet you personally," he said. "Boyd tells me you've been resistant to our offers. I wanted to understand why." "I think you understand perfectly." "Enlighten me." Nora leaned against the newly painted railing. "You want the water. You've wanted it for 20 years. You tried everything to get it from Dorothea Hargrove, and when she died, you thought you had won. But then I showed up." Mercer's smile didn't waver. "Direct. I appreciate that. So let me be direct in return." He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. $500,000. Cash. Untraceable if you prefer. You sign the deed over to Crestwood, you take the money, and you disappear. No questions asked. $500,000. It was more money than Nora had ever imagined. Enough to buy a house somewhere else. A real house in a real neighborhood with schools and hospitals and neighbors who would notice if something went wrong. Enough to give Wren everything she deserved. Mercer held out the envelope. Take it. Give your daughter a real life. This place. He gestured at the farmhouse. It's a ruin. You've done some work, I'll grant you that. But it will never be more than a money pit. A millstone around your neck. Nora looked at the envelope. Then she looked at the house behind her. At the fresh paint on the railings. At the new shingles on the roof. At the window where Wren's face was pressed against the glass, watching. Mr. Mercer, she said slowly, I lived in a van for 2 years. Do you know what that's like? Waking up every morning not knowing where you'll sleep that night. Watching your daughter learn to brush her teeth in gas station bathrooms. Teaching her to be quiet when police officers knock on the window at 2 a.m. He said nothing. I'm here because this is the first place in 2 years where I've woken up and known where I am. This is the first place where my daughter has her own room. This is the first place that feels like it belongs to us. She stepped to the edge of the porch. You think I'm here because of the money. You think I'm holding out for a bigger offer. I'm not. I'm here because this is home. For the first time in my daughter's life, she has a home. And you cannot buy that. Mercer's smile finally faded. Everyone has a price, Miss Callahan. No. Nora shook her head. Everyone has a value. But not everything has a price. And this. She gestured at the house, the land, the mountains rising in the distance. This is priceless. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Franklin Mercer tucked the envelope back into his jacket. 90 days, he said softly. That's what the county gave you. 90 days to make this place habitable. You have 15 left. He turned and walked back to his Escalade. At the door, he paused. I'll be watching, Ms. Callahan. And when you fail, and you will fail, I'll be there to pick up the pieces. The engine roared to life. The SUV backed down the driveway and disappeared around the curve of Ridge Road. Nora stood on the porch, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. 15 days. She looked at the house, at the work still undone, at the mountains still to climb. Then she picked up her paintbrush and went back to work. 15 days. The number burned in Nora's mind like a brand. 15 days to finish what she had started. 15 days to transform a century-old ruin into something that could pass a county inspection. 15 days to prove that she belonged here, that this land was hers, that Crestwood Capital could not simply wait her out and watch her fail. She worked from dawn until she couldn't see her hands in front of her face. Then she worked by flashlight until her body refused to move. Then she slept for a few hours and started again. The roof was done. The electrical was done. The water was done. But there was still so much more. The kitchen ceiling needed proper repair, not just the boards she had nailed over the hole. The foundation had cracks that needed sealing before winter. The porch, despite her new railings, still tilted dangerously where the support beams had rotted through. And the inspection would cover everything. Every outlet. Every pipe. every structural element that could pose a danger to occupants. Nora had read the county habitability standards so many times she could recite them from memory. Safe electrical system, potable water supply, sound roof, functional heating, no structural hazards. She was close, so close. But close wasn't good enough. Day 78. Earl showed up at dawn with his truck full of lumber. "Heard you might need some help," he said gruffly, climbing out of the cab. "Figured I'd lend a hand." Nora stared at him. "I can't afford to pay you for full days right now. I'm running out of—" Did I ask for payment? He was already unloading 2x4s, stacking them neatly by the porch. Way I see it, Dot Hargrove was a good woman. Helped my mother through some hard times back when I was a kid. Seems right to help whoever's carrying on her work. Before Nora could respond, another truck appeared on the road. Then another. Henry Kowalczyk climbed out of the first one, his weathered face set with determination. Behind him came his 2 grown sons carrying toolboxes and power tools. "Patricia called," Henry said by way of explanation. "Said you were in the final stretch, said you might need hands." Patricia Oakes herself arrived minutes later, driving a pickup loaded with food casseroles, fresh bread, thermoses of coffee. The Brennans came behind her with paint and brushes, and a ladder tall enough to reach the highest eaves. By mid-morning, there were 15 people working on the farmhouse. Nora stood in the yard, overwhelmed, watching strangers repair her porch and patch her walls and paint her shutters. These were people she had met only briefly, people she had approached with documents and desperate hope. And here they were, giving up their Saturday to help her fight. "Why?" she asked Patricia, who was setting up a makeshift lunch station on sawhorses. "You barely know me." Patricia smiled, her eyes crinkling. "Honey, we know Crestwood. We know what they did to our families, our neighbors. For 20 years, we've been too scared to fight back." She looked at the house, at the workers swarming over it like bees rebuilding a damaged hive. "You gave us something we'd forgotten we had. Hope. The least we can do is swing a hammer." The work continued. Day by day, hour by hour, the farmhouse transformed. The porch was rebuilt with new support beams, level and strong. The kitchen ceiling was properly repaired, insulated, sealed against the Montana winter. The cracks in the foundation were filled with hydraulic cement. The remaining windows were freed from their boards, cleaned, and fitted with new glass. Wren watched it all with wonder, running between the workers, bringing them water, asking endless questions about tools and techniques. The workers adopted her as a kind of mascot, teaching her to hold a level, letting her hammer nails into scrap wood, praising her efforts with solemn sincerity. "She's got good hands," Henry Kowalczyk told Nora one evening. "Steady, patient. She'll be a builder someday if she wants." Nora watched her daughter carry a piece of sandpaper to one of Henry's sons, her small face serious with concentration. For the first time in 2 years, Wren looked like a normal child. Not a child of parking lots and uncertainty. A child with a home. A child with a future. Whatever happened with the inspection, Nora thought this had already been worth it. Day 87, 2 days before the deadline. Nora was in the living room touching up the paint around the fireplace when she heard the crunch of gravel outside. Her heart seized another black SUV, another threat. But when she looked through the window, she saw only a dusty sedan with county plates. Vernon Suttles climbed out, moving slowly, his old joints protesting the cold. Nora met him on the porch. "Mr. Suttles, the inspection isn't until day 89. I know." He looked up at the house and something shifted in his expression. Wonder, perhaps, or respect. "I wanted to see for myself. I heard rumors in town." He shook his head slowly. Didn't believe them. Nora followed his gaze. The farmhouse stood straight and proud against the October sky. Fresh white paint gleamed on the clapboards. The new roof shingles were dark and solid. The porch no longer tilted. The windows, all of them, were clean and whole, reflecting the afternoon light, like eyes finally opened after a long sleep. "You did this in 90 days, Vernon said. It wasn't a question. I had help. I heard about that too." He turned to look at her, his tired eyes suddenly sharp. "You know Crestwood's not going to take this lying down. They've got lawyers, they've got connections. Even if you pass the inspection, they'll find another way to come after you." "I know. And you're staying anyway. This is my home, Mr. Suttles. Mine and my daughter's. I'm not leaving." He studied her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "Dorothea would have liked you," he said quietly. "She was the same way. Stubborn as a mule. Fought like hell for what was hers." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "I probably shouldn't be doing this, but I've been the county clerk for 32 years, and I'm tired of watching Crestwood win." He handed her the envelope. "What is this? The inspection is day after tomorrow. Judith Holcomb is the county inspector. She's fair. She's thorough. And she can't be bought. Which is why Crestwood has been trying to get her fired for a decade." He paused. "But you didn't hear that from me." Nora opened the envelope. Inside was a checklist, the exact items Judith Holcomb would be examining during the habitability inspection. Electrical systems, plumbing, structural integrity, fire safety. Every category, every requirement spelled out in detail. "Study it," Vernon said. "Make sure everything is perfect. Don't give them any excuse." "Why are you helping me?" He was quiet for a moment, looking at the house. "Because I was here when they went after Dorothea. I watched it happen. Watched them grind her down year after year. And I didn't do anything because I was scared of losing my job." His voice roughened. "I'm 62 years old, Miss Callahan. I'll be retiring soon whether I want to or not. And I decided I didn't want to spend my last years knowing I let them win again." He turned and walked back to his sedan. At the door, he paused. "Good luck. I mean that. Day 88. The night before the inspection, Nora couldn't sleep. She walked through the house with her flashlight checking every detail, every outlet, every faucet, every window latch and door hinge and floorboard. She ran her hands over the walls, feeling for soft spots. She tested the stairs for creaks. She flushed the toilets, turned on every light, opened and closed every door. Everything worked. Everything was solid. Everything was ready. But still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something would go wrong. Around midnight, she found herself in the living room, standing in front of the fireplace. The three objects still sat on the mantelpiece: the porcelain bird, the polished stone, the brass candlestick. She hadn't moved them. They felt like guardians now watching over the house and everyone in it. She thought about Dorothea Hargrove, a woman she had never met, would never meet, but whose presence filled every corner of this house. A woman who had spent 20 years fighting the same battle Nora was fighting now. A woman who had hidden money in walls and secrets in stones, and hope in the pages of a child's journal. What would Dorothea think if she could see this? The fresh paint, the new roof, the community that had gathered to help. The little girl sleeping upstairs in a yellow room dreaming of castles and friendly dragons. Would she be proud? Nora liked to think she would. She reached out and touched the porcelain bird, running her finger along its delicate wing. "I hope I'm doing right by you," she whispered. "I hope I'm the one you were waiting for." The house creaked softly around her, the old wood settling. It sounded, she thought, almost like an answer. Day 89. The morning of the inspection dawned cold and bright, the October sky so blue it hurt to look at. Frost glittered on the grass and rimmed the edges of the windows. The farmhouse stood in the center of it all, white and solid, throwing a long shadow across the yard. Nora was dressed in her cleanest clothes. Jeans without holes, a sweater without stains, boots that she had scrubbed clean of paint and dirt. Wren stood beside her on the porch, wearing the new winter coat Nora had bought her with some of Dorothea's money. It was Red Wren's favorite color, with a hood lined in fake fur. "Mommy, I'm nervous," Wren whispered. "I know, baby. Me too. What if they say we can't stay?" Nora knelt down to look into her daughter's eyes. "Then we'll figure out what to do next, together. That's what families do. But I don't want to leave. This is our home." "I know." Nora pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, the warmth of her small body. "I know, sweetheart. I don't want to leave either." They stood together on the porch watching the road. At exactly 9 o'clock, a county truck appeared around the bend. Judith Holcomb was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair, pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that missed nothing. She moved through the house with brisk efficiency, clipboard in hand, checking items off her list with a mechanical pencil that she wielded like a surgical instrument. She said almost nothing. Nora followed behind her, answering questions, when asked, pointing out improvements when relevant, but mostly just watching, waiting, trying to read something, anything in that impassive face. The electrical panel, check. The water heater, check. The plumbing under the kitchen sink, check. The stairs, the railings, the windows, the doors, check, check, check. Boyd Tatum had arrived sometime during the inspection, parking his SUV at the end of the driveway and leaning against the hood with his arms crossed. He was smiling, that reptile smile radiating confidence. He expected her to fail. He was here to watch it happen. Nora ignored him. The inspection moved upstairs. Wren's room, the bathroom, the master bedroom that Nora had claimed as her own. Each space was examined with the same methodical precision. And then it was over. Judith Holcomb stood in the center of the living room making final notes on her clipboard. The silence stretched out thick and heavy, pressing against Nora's chest until she thought she might scream. Finally, the inspector looked up. Her eyes moved to the mantelpiece, to the 3 objects arranged there. She stared at them for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she walked over to the fireplace. She reached out and touched the porcelain bird just as Nora had done the night before. Her fingers lingered on its wing. "I knew Dot Hargrove," she said quietly. Nora's heart stopped. "She was my fifth-grade teacher. Millbrook Elementary, 1970. Judith turned to look at Nora, and for the first time, there was something human in her eyes, something warm. "She taught me that some things are worth fighting for, that you don't give up just because the odds are against you." She looked around the room at the fresh paint, the solid floors, the windows full of morning light. "She would have loved what you've done here." Then she uncapped her mechanical pencil and wrote something on her clipboard. One word: habitable. "The property meets all county standards for safe habitation." Judith said, her voice formal again, but with a note of satisfaction beneath it. "Under the provisions of the Homestead Hopefuls Program and the County Revitalization Initiative, the outstanding tax lien of $52,000 is hereby cleared. The property is yours, Ms. Callahan, free and clear." Nora's knees buckled. She caught herself on the mantelpiece, her hand landing beside the porcelain bird, her vision blurring with tears she couldn't hold back. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Judith Holcomb nodded once, gathered her things, and walked out the door. Through the window, Nora saw Boyd Tatum's face as the inspector passed him on her way to her truck. His smile was gone. In its place was something ugly: anger, disbelief, the expression of a predator who had just lost his prey. He caught Nora's eye through the window. She didn't look away. Let him see. Let him know. She had won. He got into his SUV and drove away without a word. The days that followed were quiet. The volunteers stopped coming because there was nothing left to do. The house was finished. Not perfect, not magazine-ready, but solid and warm and safe. A home. Nora sent copies of Dorothea's evidence to the FBI field office in Helena and to the Montana Department of Justice. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't call the newspapers. She simply mailed the packages, certified mail with return receipt, and waited. The investigation began quietly. Then it grew. 3 months after the inspection, Crestwood Capital announced that it was divesting from all Montana properties due to changing market conditions. 2 months after that, Franklin Mercer resigned from the company's board of directors amid allegations of corruption and fraud. Boyd Tatum disappeared entirely. Rumor had it he had fled to Canada ahead of an indictment. The families who had been pressured to sell were contacted by lawyers. Some received settlements. Others got their land back. Henry Kowalczyk's brother returned to the valley for the first time in a decade. Standing on the property his family had owned for 3 generations, weeping without shame. The water, Dorothea's precious spring, was protected. The county designated it a natural heritage site, preventing any commercial development within a 5-mile radius. The creek that fed the valley would keep flowing pure and cold and free for generations to come. Nora watched it all happen from the farmhouse on Ridge Road, and she thought about the woman who had made it possible. A woman who had fought alone for 20 years. A woman who had died believing she had lost. But she hadn't lost. She had planted seeds. And now, finally, they were blooming. Spring came to Montana like a promise fulfilled. The snow melted. The creek swelled with fresh water. The meadows exploded with wildflowers, purple and yellow and white, carpeting the hills in color. Birds returned to nest in the eaves of the farmhouse, filling the mornings with song. Wren turned 7 in April. Nora threw her a birthday party, her first real party with friends from the school she had started attending in Millbrook, with cake and balloons and presents wrapped in bright paper. The living room that had once been buried in dust was now filled with laughter, with running children, with the kind of ordinary chaos that Nora had once thought she would never experience again. That evening, after the guests had gone and Wren was asleep upstairs, Nora sat on the porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains. The farmhouse glowed in the fading light. The white paint she had applied with her own hands seemed to absorb the colors of the sky, rose and gold and deep, deep purple. The new roof was solid overhead. The porch was level beneath her feet. This was hers. All of it. The house, the land, the spring, the future. She had bought it for $4 and paid for it with everything she had. And it was worth every penny, every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, every moment of fear and doubt and desperate hope. She thought about the van sometimes. It was still parked behind the house, covered with a tarp no longer needed but not yet discarded. A reminder of where they had come from, a monument to the journey that had brought them here. She thought about her father, too, about his last days in the hospital when the cancer had taken everything but his voice, and he had held her hand and whispered the words that had become her compass. The Callahan family doesn't run. He would have loved this place. He would have understood why she fought so hard to keep it. He would have been proud. 1 year later. The farmhouse had become something new. Nora had converted the front room into a small clinic, using her nursing skills to serve the families of the valley who couldn't afford the long drive to the hospital in Billings. It wasn't much, a few examination tables, basic supplies, her training and compassion, but it was enough. Word spread. People came from across the county, some driving hours for care they couldn't find anywhere else. She didn't charge much. Often she charged nothing at all. The money from Dorothea's safes had been more than enough to sustain them. And Nora had decided long ago that some things were more important than profit. The valley was healing too. Without Crestwood's pressure, families who had considered leaving decided to stay. New people moved in, drawn by the cheap land and the tight-knit community. The population of Millbrook crept upward for the first time in decades. The diner reopened. The hardware store got a new coat of paint. It was still a small town at the edge of the world, but it was a town that had remembered how to hope. On a warm evening in late May, Nora was sitting on the porch when Wren came running out of the house, her face flushed with excitement. "Mommy, Mommy, come look." Nora followed her inside into the living room to the fireplace where the 3 objects still sat on the mantelpiece. "Look," Wren said, pointing. "Look at the bird." Nora looked. The porcelain bird sat where it always had, white and delicate, its blue markings catching the evening light. But there was something different. Nestled beside the bird, so small she almost missed it, was a real feather. Pure white, soft as silk, placed with obvious care against the porcelain wing. Nora's breath caught. "Where did this come from?" "I don't know," Wren said. "It was just there, like a gift." Nora reached out and touched the feather. It was real, definitely real, still soft and fresh. She looked around the room at the house that had become their home, at the walls that held so many secrets. The house remembers everything. Maybe it did. Maybe it always would. Maybe Dorothea was still here somehow, watching over them. Maybe she had never really left. Nora smiled and turned to her daughter. "You know what I think? I think the house is saying thank you." Wren's eyes went wide. The house can talk. Not with words, but with little signs, little gifts. She picked up the feather and held it up to the light. "Like this." Wren considered this seriously. "Then we should say thank you back." "How?" The little girl thought for a moment. Then she walked to the mantelpiece and carefully rearranged the three objects, making room in the center. She placed a small drawing there, a picture she had made in school, showing the farmhouse with a smiling sun and stick figures holding hands in front of it. "There," she said. "Now the house knows we love it." Nora pulled her daughter into a hug, her heart so full it ached. "I think the house already knows, sweetheart. I think it's always known." That night, Nora dreamed of Dorothea Hargrove. The old woman sat in the living room in the rocking chair by the fireplace, her hands folded in her lap. She looked just as Nora had imagined her, small and fierce, with bright eyes and silver hair pulled back from a face lined with years of laughter and struggle. "You did well," Dorothea said. Her voice was stronger than it had been on the cassette tape, full of life and warmth. "Better than I could have hoped." "I just did what you asked," Nora said. "I stayed, I fought." "You did more than that." The old woman smiled. "You built something. A home, a community, a future." She looked around the room at the fresh paint and clean windows and the drawing on the mantelpiece. "This is what I always wanted for this place. Not just survival, but life." "Will you stay?" Nora asked. "Will you keep watching over us?" Dorothea's smile grew wider. "My dear girl, I never left, and I never will." She reached out and touched Nora's hand, and her fingers were warm and solid, not ghostly at all. "This house remembers everything, including the people who loved it. And I loved it very much." She stood, moving toward the door, and in the way of dreams it opened onto, not the porch, but a meadow full of wildflowers stretching toward mountains painted with the gold of sunrise. "Take care of my home," Dorothea said. "Take care of my spring. Take care of each other." "I will," Nora promised. "We will." The old woman nodded once, satisfied. Then she walked into the meadow, into the light, and was gone. Nora woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee brewing downstairs. She lay in bed for a moment, remembering the dream, feeling the warmth of it still lingering in her chest. Then she rose and went to the window. The valley spread out before her, green and gold and alive. The creek sparkled in the distance. The mountains stood eternal against the endless blue sky. And below, on the porch, Wren was sitting with a book in her lap, her red coat bright against the white railings, looking for all the world like she had been born here, like she had always belonged. This was home. Not because of the deed in the county records, not because of the money that had made it possible, not even because of the battle they had fought and won. It was home because they had chosen it, because they had stayed when they could have run, because they had planted themselves in this soil and decided to grow. The Callahan family doesn't run, and now finally they had somewhere to stand. Epilogue. 3 years later. The farmhouse had grown. Nora had added a wing to the back, expanding the clinic to serve more patients. She had hired a young nurse from Billings, a woman named Jenny, who had been looking for a place to start over, just as Nora had once been. Together, they provided care for dozens of families across the valley. Wren was 10 now, tall for her age, with her mother's dark hair and her own fierce spirit. She had adopted a dog from the shelter in town, a mutt named Captain, who followed her everywhere, and she spent her summers exploring the woods and swimming in the creek and learning the names of every bird that nested in the valley. The community had continued to heal. Henry Kowalczyk had passed away peacefully the previous winter, but his sons carried on his legacy, working the land their family had nearly lost. Patricia Oakes had remarried a widower from 2 towns over who made her laugh and brought her flowers every Sunday. The Brennans had 2 children now, both born in the valley, growing up in the place their parents had chosen to call home. And the house remembered. The 3 objects still sat on the mantelpiece: the bird, the stone, the candlestick. Beside them now were other things. Wren's drawings, a photograph of Henry Kowalczyk, a pressed wildflower from the meadow where Dorothea had walked in Nora's dream. The house remembered everything, and it held those memories safe. On the anniversary of the day she had signed the deed, Nora walked to the edge of the property to the place where the spring emerged from the hillside. The water was cold and clear, flowing over stones that had been there for millennia, feeding the creek that fed the valley. She knelt beside the spring and dipped her hands into the water. This was what Crestwood had wanted. This was what Dorothea had protected. This was what Nora had fought for without fully understanding why. Now she understood. The water was life. It fed the land and the people and the future. It was the heart of everything hidden underground, flowing unseen, sustaining the world above, just like hope, just like love, just like home. Nora stood and looked back at the farmhouse, white against the green hills, smoke rising from the chimney, her daughter's laughter echoing across the meadow. $4. That's what she had paid for all of this. $4 and everything she had. And she would pay it again 1,000 times over for what she had received in return. A home, a family, a future, a place to stand. That evening, as the sun set and the stars began to appear, Wren found her mother on the porch looking out at the valley. "Mommy." "Yes, sweetheart." "This is our castle, right?" Nora smiled and pulled her daughter close. "No, baby. Castles are for hiding in. Castles have walls to keep people out." She looked at the house, at the windows glowing with warm light, at the door that was always open to friends and neighbors and anyone in need. This is something better than a castle. What is it? It's our home. Nora pressed a kiss to the top of her daughter's head. And nobody can ever take it away. They sat together in the gathering dark, mother and daughter, watching the first stars appear above the mountains. The house stood behind them, solid and warm and alive. The spring flowed beneath them, eternal and pure. And the valley stretched out before them, green and gold and full of promise. Home, at last, forever.